The High Elves, one of the most ancient and well-disciplined armies on the battlefield. With thousands of years of experience, they've had plenty of time to hone their style of warfare into an art form, and are arguably the most formidable army in the world. If you can wield their strengths correctly, you'll be unstoppable. But become reckless and wasteful with their units, and you will surely perish. This guide is about how to use the High Elves army in battle, and isn't necessarily about the campaign or online specifically.
Elves of Ulthuan, to me!
So let's begin as always with the army's main strengths and weaknesses. Well, really, they are just a damn good faction who are pretty much strong all round, with very few weaknesses. Great melee and missile infantry, great cavalry, artillery options, magic, their flying units of course. The only section you could say they're missing is any kind of monstrous infantry. However though, despite having a lot of powerful units, there really isn't a lot of them overall, as their roster is quite small. I mean, all the units in the roster are strong, but there just isn't a lot of them for you to choose from, which can limit the way you get things done. And as there are no expendable units, applying your troops well and getting the most out of them is quite important. Despite their lack of options though, the units they do have are actually pretty versatile and can thrive in many different playstyles. The Asur also have some of the best endurance of any faction. High armor, high leadership and high melee defense mean they're not easy to get rid of. However, like other elven armies, they have less health than other factions, which kind of offsets the endurance a little bit, but still I think the endurance is more powerful than their lack of health. And for a last positive, the standout part of their army is probably their dragons. Because you know, they're freaking dragons, man. They can absolutely terrorize the battlefield, and their breath attacks can ruin any unit quite easily. Look after your dragons and they will look after you. Now, probably the biggest downside to their army is how expensive all the units are. Some of them may be even overpriced. And of course, the biggest danger of having expensive units is that you have smaller armies usually, meaning there's a bigger chance you could get overrun by a larger force. So always take that into account. So whether friend or foe, get to know these strengths and weaknesses of the High Elves. Now let's dive into the roster and roughly what every unit is meant to be used for. First up on the scales for the High Elves, weighing in at about £135 probably, she is your cheapest Lord option. And while she does claim to be a melee expert, she's probably best off sticking to being a ranged character. She has a powerful bow attacks and can increase the reload speed of nearby units, and if you put her on one of her mounts, her steed, an eagle or a dragon, she can become significantly more difficult to deal with as she can blast them and kite them while they can't catch her. She's by no means bad in melee, but not the best choice if you want a melee lord. She's going to be best used if you want to make use of that ranged power, or to take advantage of some of the mounts, especially the dragons. If you are after a less expensive melee lord, then the prince is going to be the better choice. He has more armor, a silver shield, and better melee defense than the princess. He also shares pretty much the same mounts as the princess, which if you put them both on a star dragon, you'll see the princess kind of evens out in terms of melee capabilities with the prince, and she still has her ranged attacks, so if you're looking to bring some of the higher end mounts with your lord, then the princess is probably the better choice either way because she still is good in melee, but she has that powerful ranged attack as well. The biggest attraction of these two lords is their mounts, because both Tyrion and Teclis can only use steeds for a mount. No eagles, no dragons. So it's good to try and take advantage of that when using these lords. If you're after one of the most powerful melee lords that will end your opponent's lord before he can even say, "Oh crap, Tyrion's about to murder my lord," then Tyrion might be a good choice for you. His stats are pretty ridiculous with 125 armor, 85 leadership, 77 melee attack, 60 melee defense and 490 weapon strength, although not armor piercing. He is an absolute monster. He's also a duelist, so an expert at slaying enemy characters. And if that didn't make him terrifying enough, he also has an augment to make him even stronger briefly. So long story short, if you want the ultimate melee foot lord, Tyrion. And the last lord we have is Benedict Cumberelf, otherwise known as Teclis. First of all, with 15 armor and 28 melee defense, he's in danger of having the old cheese sandwich effect, so keep him away from melee as much as possible. Although he could maybe go and bother some archers if he has nothing else to do. He's probably best off on his steed mount at all times, so he can get himself out of trouble. Teclis' strength of course is his powerful magic. From Net of Amantok to Flock of Doom to Regrowth to name a few, he's got some of the best spells going, and a bunch of awesome abilities as well. So going to be your best choice if you want to make use of his varied magic options. The Noble is your first and least expensive hero choice, with his main feature being that he is anti-large, including a charge defense. He's only anti-large when on foot or on his steed though. He may be best served mixing in with your infantry to try and support them, or in with your cavalry if you put them on a horse to give them that anti-large bonus. He can also do well helping take down those large characters. You can put him on a Great Eagle, which will take away that anti-large bonus and will just give him normal damage, and he'll be better off maybe as a harassing mobile unit. Or you can plonk him on a chariot to make him anti-infantry. Personally though, I find him best sticking to anti-large. On to our mages, and there's 3 at your disposal. If you're looking to damage the enemy primarily, then the high spellbook is going to be the best way to go. If you're looking to play more defensive and heal your troops and keep them in the game, then life is of course the way to go. If you want a bit more of a tactical combo spellbook, then the light lore is going to be the way to go. Which one you bring really depends on your build's playstyle and how you want to use them. Of course, try to keep them out of melee for the most part, and they can be one of the most dangerous figures on the battlefield. Your last hero choice is kind of a combination of the previous 2. The Lore Master of Hoeth can dabble in magic and melee, and with an armor piercing bonus versus infantry, he may be best off fighting alongside your melee units, although he can definitely throw down with some characters if need be. He's got a strong little spellbook too, with such greats as Shem's Burning Gaze, Spirit Leech and Earthblood. If you take off some of his spells, you can make him pretty considerably priced, which means you'll get not only a melee hero but a magic hero as well. Nice bang for your buck. Certainly cheaper than bringing a noble and a mage. Good old Spearman. Your cheapest infantry, but not cheap by any means. Very much your basic Spearman unit. Anti-large and with the charge defense naturally. They can be a great choice for a front line due to their holding power with high melee defense and a silver shield, especially if you upgrade them, or they can just protect your flanks in a traditional Spearman role. Be wary of high melee attack damage dealing units coming their way though, as your Spearmen may well get chewed through. Expect them to hold well, but don't expect them to rake in the kills. If killing the enemy is more on your agenda, then the White Lions of Trace are going to be the boys for the job. Lots of armor with good melee attack and armor piercing weapon strength, they'll bring the pain on whoever they face. They've got a good missile resistance and get some buffs in the forest, but ultimately their pretty low melee defense means they will take damage quite quickly and thus are not the greatest choice for a lone front line. You could mix them in with other units like Spearmen to help take the heat off them and reduce the amount of damage they take and thus their survivability. They could even opt to be a flanking infantry if you wanted, provided you can protect them from monsters and cavalry, and with quite a hefty price tag, they're not a unit you want to use recklessly. If you're after the ultimate in high elf infantry killing power though, the Swordmasters of Hoeth should meet your needs. Not far dissimilar to the White Lions, just with more melee attack and melee defense, and armor piercing with a bonus versus infantry. They also have a chance to deflect missile attacks. Again, due to an even beefier price tag than the White Lions, they are not really a frontline option, more of a nice accent to your army. 2 or 3 units can make a big difference, supporting a spear frontline against tougher opponents perhaps. If you are facing a smaller army faction though, you may be able to get away with the front line of them, which will be pretty brutal. If you're looking for arguably the best anti-large unit in the game, get yourself some Phoenix Guard. They will of course slay anything large with ease, and with good melee attack and weapon strength, they'll put the hurt on most units they face. They have a charge defense against everything and a nice 30% physical resistance. They're also one of the few high elf units that cause fear. So if you're expecting some elite large units or lords and heroes on mounts, Phoenix Guard will slay them, albeit for a mighty price tag. Onto one of the strengths of the high elf army, their missile units. Their cheapest archer unit is nothing special other than its mighty 180 range. They do a good amount of damage, but with little armor they are quite fragile. For this reason, they're a good choice against factions that don't have ranged units or short-ranged units, because if they engage in a skirmish with other missile units, they'll probably take far more damage than you want. And of course, they're going to need protection from cavalry and monsters. Archers with light armor are basically exactly the same unit, they just have some armor on, meaning they can trade with other missile units far better than their unarmored archers. So when facing factions that have strong missile units themselves with good range, you'll probably want to bring light armoured archers so they don't get cut down super quickly. They can serve the general archer purposes of damaging units before they reach you, blasting down large units, protecting your airspace, all the typical archer jobs. Lothern Sea Guard, a very unique unit indeed. They're not only a spear infantry but a missile infantry as well, and they'll perform both of those roles in the typical fashion, as a spear unit and as an archer unit. They're not going to do great in melee against infantry though, and they have a little bit less range as archers. But the selling point of this unit is that it can protect itself. It's an archer unit that doesn't need babysitting, meaning they can go off and try to flank and shoot the enemy in the back, or single-handedly go and pursue monsters and cavalry themselves. Lothern Sea Guard with shields are obviously exactly the same unit as the previous one, just they have a silver shield, and slightly better melee defense. That shield though does make them the best choice for taking on other missile units, and that extra melee defense means they're actually better than your regular spear infantry. So a versatile little unit that can play roles on the front line, on the flanks, or maybe even flanking the enemy, although all that does not come cheap. Illyrian Reavers are your light cavalry option, but they still pack quite the punch. With decent melee attack weapon strength and a nice charge bonus, they can actually bring some decent damage to the table, unlike most light cavalry. Of course going to be great for running down the archers and artillery, or even dropping a quick bit of hammer and anvil on a front line. And with that nippy speed and vanguard deployment, you could set up some nice ambushes. Onto Illyrian Reaver Archers, very much the same unit as the previous one, just not quite as good in melee by a little bit, but of course making up for that though with a nice missile attack which has good range and decent damage. They still have that vanguard deployment and can fire whilst moving, so great for kiting and harassing less mobile factions. Silver Helms, a unit that has plenty of potential to do a ton of damage. It's well armoured, it's got a beefy charge bonus, and its attack stats are pretty good. They can play a traditional shock cavalry role really well, protecting your flanks or pushing on the enemy looking for that hammer and anvil in the back of the enemy front line. But do beware, their base melee defense of 22 is pretty low, so if you leave them in prolonged combat, they're going to take a fair amount of damage pretty quickly, so make sure you get them out of there once they've done their charge and done a little bit of damage, or you may find them running for the hills pretty quick. If you'd like a slightly tougher version with 30 melee defense and a nice bronze shield, then guess what? The Silver Helms with shields are going to be a better call. But the main reason you'd probably bring these ones is if you're facing a faction with a lot of missile units, so they can hopefully survive ranged attacks a bit better. If you're looking for the ultimate high elf hammer and anvil experience though, Dragon Princes are a no-brainer. Tons of armour and a gargantuan charge bonus mean they're not only double-eyed bastards, but they'll hit like a double-decker tank as well. They are tough enough to stay in a prolonged fight a little bit, but ultimately are still a shock cavalry. You want to keep charging them round so they keep getting that huge charge bonus. They also have a nice physical and fire resistance. Be warned though, as brutal as they are, they will want to steer clear of those anti-large cavalries, as they are something they'll struggle to deal with. The Ithelmar Chariot, very much a typical chariot unit, charge it round, charge it through units, try to keep it moving, don't let it stay in prolonged combat, yada yada yada. It will do the job very damn well though, lots of armour, massive charge bonus, tons of weapon strength, bonus versus infantry, it'll mow down fools like there's no tomorrow. If you'd like to harass the enemy a bit more though, then the Tyrannok Chariot may be the better call for you. It's not quite as strong in melee as the Ithelmar, but with 165 range and 124 missile damage, you can whittle away at the enemy's health from a safe distance. Both can be very powerful and difficult to stop, with the Tyrannok maybe being a bit more useful against faster factions. The Great Eagle, pretty much just a bird if we're honest, although about 300 times the size of a regular eagle, so that does make it pretty fucking scary, which is probably why it has the fear trait. Going to be very useful nipping around the map, supporting other parts of your army, trying to reduce the leadership of enemies that they're fighting, or as it's very quick, it can be great for getting after missiles, disrupting them, stopping them from firing, and just being a general nuisance. I find they don't do too well staying in one place too long, and as they have a decent charge bonus, flying them around, charging them into different things all the time can be really beneficial. The Flamespire Phoenix, the more offensive of your two phoenixes. Its quick speed, nice charge bonus and fear and terror suggest that just like the Great Eagle, it's a unit that should be charged around and not really left in one place too long, especially as it has low armor and melee defense-ish. It also has the ability to drop firebombs on your enemies, which is particularly powerful against groups of units. If you can keep one of these around until the late game of a battle when enemy leadership is low, they'll wreak absolute havoc and should be able to rout off plenty of units with their bombs or fear and terror. The better choice for pushing on the enemy. If you want a defensive supporting unit, the Frostheart Phoenix is the better choice. It has a lot of armor and melee defense, so it's going to be better at surviving than the Flamespire Phoenix. It has an ability that reduces enemy melee attack and armor piercing damage, so mix it in with an infantry or cavalry to help them out and reduce the enemy's potential damage dealing power. Enemies that will be affected are ones that will be within its aura, so the more enemy units you can have near this Phoenix, the more use you're going to get out of its debuff ability. It also has Fear and Terror to make some use of. Understand that the Phoenixes are very different, and you'll need to see what works with your build. It's dragon time. The Sun Dragon is your cheapest dragon choice, and has plenty of damage output power. With nice melee attack, weapon strength, and a good charge bonus, it can definitely dish out the pain on all kinds of enemies. As it does have a pretty good charge bonus, it benefits from not staying in prolonged combat and repeatedly charging in and out like a shock cavalry, especially as it doesn't have the best armour. And of course it also has the brutal breath attack, which apparently is better against a single unit and not so good against single combatants, but we'll look into whether that really makes much of a difference later on. Very difficult for enemies to stop without the right tools, and the Fear and Terror make it great in the late game. And then you have your Moon Dragon, which honestly isn't far different from the Sun Dragon, just with most notably more weapon strength and a smaller charge bonus. Still the Fear and Terror, still the breath attack, although its breath attack is apparently better against large single units, but either way overall it's going to be great at smashing all kinds of enemy units. If you want the most brutal of all dragons though, the Star Dragon is your only choice. It has more armor, melee defense, melee attack and weapon strength than the other two dragons, making it not only tougher but more dangerously damaging as well. That's right, dangerously damaging. It does have a smaller charge bonus however, and its breath attack is meant to be good against armor and large combatants. Honestly, all the dragons are pretty much the same, you'll use them in all the same way, it's just the more money you spend, the better a dragon you'll get. The breath attacks are meant to be better at different things, but we'll look into that later on. The one piece of artillery at the High Elves' disposal is the Eagle Claw Bolt Thrower. It's got decent range with anti-large or infantry killing power, and it's an artillery. You know how to use an artillery, sticking with the pointy end sort of idea, but instead of sticking them with the pointy end, just fire the pointy end at them. Switch between the fire modes depending on your target. A great choice if you want to play defensively. So now that we know what all the High Elf units are capable of, how the hell do we use them? Well, overall, the High Elves are quite the defensive faction. This is apparent by their decent armour, high leadership, high melee defense, and lots of ranged capabilities. And of course, that superior archer range is a big advantage. So they have the options to hurt the enemy a lot before they even reach the melee fight, and in many situations can simply outlast the enemy. You by no means have to play defensively, you can definitely be aggressive with the High Elves, but the army overall is built around defensive tactics. This is amplified by an ability that most High Elf units possess, Martial Prowess, or Martial Mastery if you're an elite unit. This will give the unit a tiny bit of extra melee attack and a good amount extra of melee defense, further increasing their chances of outlasting the enemy. This buff is only applied though when a unit is above 50% health, so as the battle wears on, High Elves are going to become slightly less effective. This is something to take note of in campaign, as you'll want to try and keep your armies as replenished as possible. Martial Prowess also helps keep your lower melee defense units like White Lions for example, in the fight a bit longer. So if we were throwing together a traditional High Elf defensive build, it may look something like this. I've got a front line of spearmen which should hold pretty well with their high melee defense, although they will have to watch out for high melee attack units that may chew through them. To support that front line where need be, I've got some White Lions and some Swordmasters, as well as a Lawmaster of Hoeth, all to help support that front line. I've then got plenty of ranged power with 2 units of archers and 2 units of Lothan Seaguard. The Lothan Seaguard of course can help protect the flanks with their spears. Out on the flanks I've got 1 unit of Silver Helms with shields, and on the other side 1 unit of Dragon Princes. And my lord is a princess on a Moon Dragon. So most of this army is geared towards playing defensively, with the cavalry and dragon being my main offensive units. So the tactic of having a front line of spearmen to hold and then missiles behind to blast the enemy is a reliable one for the High Elves. You may want to experiment with mixing in your damage dealing units though if you need more killing power on the front line. So while your spearmen are holding and your archers are putting holes in people, what the hell is everything else doing? Well, your cavalry, chariots and flying units will want to be on the offense. You may need to help out on the flanks to protect your front line, but once that's all done, you can get stuck in to the back of the enemies. Hammer and Anvil is a very powerful tactic for the High Elves as their cavalry is so damn good at it. So charge your shock cavalry in, leave it there, let it fight for about 10 seconds and then pull it away and repeat the process over and over to rack up those charge bonuses and do the most damage. Alternatively, if you've got the time and there's nothing stopping you on the flanks initially, you could charge your cavalry in to disrupt and slow down that enemy front line, giving your missiles more time to fire on them before they reach your front line. And of course, ill-defended missile units are always a good target for cavalry, so keep an eye out for those opportunities. Now let's get into the power of dragons, one of the High Elf army's true strengths. They can be utterly unstoppable if you take care of them. The biggest threat they face is probably anti-large artillery and missiles. Try to keep them out of the range of these things or deal with them before you let the dragons go in. Of course, anti-large infantry can be a threat to dragons, but with their high mass and mobility, it's quite easy for the dragons to get away from those units. Another issue in terms of the dragon's safety is, do we just charge a dragon in and leave it in combat, or do we charge it in and pull it away repeatedly like a shock cavalry? Well, let's have a little test. I sent 2 sun dragons against a whole bunch of orc boys. I sent one of the dragons in and just left it in combat and didn't touch it at all. I used another one like a shock cavalry, cycle charging it in, pulling it out, and repeating the process. What I found was that the one staying in combat got 89 kills before it decided to rout. The one that was cycle charging, by this time, still had plenty of its health left, but didn't have quite as many kills, so in a short space of time, leaving it in combat will get you more kills, but you will lose it pretty quick. And by the time the cycle charging one came close to routing with low health, it had nearly 200 kills, and it didn't actually rout, it wavered once, but managed to hang in there. So you can see from this the difference of leaving your dragon in prolonged combat or cycle charging it around, keeping it away from that damage a bit more, makes it last a lot longer and will inevitably get more kills. It will just take longer to do. Overall, it is going to do more damage than the one that stayed in combat because it's repeatedly getting its charge bonus. Not to mention that it's going to live a lot longer because it's not getting hit so often. So I believe a wise tactic for dragons and the flying units, the phoenixes as well, is charging them in and pulling them away. Cycle charging them is going to keep them safer and allow them to do more damage from their charge bonuses. This is of course easier said than done though, as it will become very micro intensive to try and manage dragons in this way, as well as trying to manage shock cavalry in the same way and maybe chariots too, so there can be a lot going on micro wise with a High Elves army. Now let's take a closer look at breath attacks, one of the main reasons you may want to bring a dragon along. A well-placed fiery death breath can lay waste to all kinds of units. So here's a few little things I found to help you make the most of them. First of all, breath attacks really aren't that great against moving units, as very often a lot of the breath attack will miss, as the dragon just aims it at the specific point of where you cast it. So best off waiting until the enemy is engaged and pinned in place, or maybe even using a net spell, and then you'll want to fire the length of the unit, rather than firing at the front or back of them, as you'll find that a lot of the breath attack will go over the unit and will miss. So don't fire from the front or back, try to hit it from the sides, position your dragon so the breath attack comes in from the sides and it will span most of the length of the unit, and in theory should absolutely decimate the unit. Distance can also play into it as well. You don't want to be too close to the unit you're firing on. A little bit of distance will give the attack a nice spread and will hopefully span the length of the unit. I also tested to see how much damage a moon dragon could do to a unit of chosen with great weapons when they're engaged. So chosen have pretty much full health, 10,500-ish. Breath attack is coming in, whittling them down. Absolutely removing that health like there's no tomorrow. 7,000 into 6,000. So it does about 4,000 damage to the chosen with great weapons. And as the moon dragon's breath is meant to be good against a single unit, it does seem that that is the case. I then tried the same thing with the star dragon, whose breath is meant to be good against armor and large combatants. So we'll see how it does against the heavily armored chosen, although they are not of course large. They are a little bit injured already as well. There are going to be some variables with this kind of testing because the units aren't necessarily in the same position for both the breath attacks, but the star dragon is going to knock off about 3,500-ish of the health. So it's not done quite as well as the moon dragon, but that could be down to variables, so who really knows. But it seems a well-placed breath attack will decimate all kinds of infantry, cavalry as well. I did find that the sun dragon doesn't do too well against large lords. I did try them all out against a large lord, and the sun dragon didn't really do as much damage as the other two. So other than that, I'd say fire your breath attack on whoever's the most dangerous. Now let's talk about some of the most elite infantry for the High Elves. First of all, the Swordmasters of Hoeth are the destroyers of all other infantry, excluding monstrous infantry of course, and even though you can't bring many units of them along necessarily, you can still rack up hundreds of kills on a single unit. And the same is true of Phoenix Guard in the anti-large field. They should be able to take down pretty much any monster in the game single-handedly. So be sure to apply both of these units to their strengths to get the most out of them. If you allow your Swordmasters to fight Minotaurs for example, it's a huge waste of your money and a very important loss for your army, as you probably only have 1, 2, maybe 3 units of Swordmasters at your disposal. And the same with Phoenix Guard, get them fighting the large units. They can put up a fight against infantry for the most part, but it's kind of a waste of their talents unless they have nothing else to do. Another unit that we could put in the elite category is Lothan's Sea Guard. While they're not technically an elite unit, they're so damn powerful in their own way. They're a very independent, unique unit that can look after themselves and dish out damage all over the gaff. So even if they've disappeared miles away from the rest of your army, they don't really have much to worry about. If cavalry or monsters come after them, well, they're anti-large. If infantry come after them, they can gun them down or simply skirmish away, or even hold their own in a melee fight, as they do have pretty good melee defense. So they can really be a defending or attacking unit. They can push out and try to get after cavalry or monsters, try to flank round. They can always shoot units in the back and sides while they're fighting on the front line. That's always a good use of missiles. So a very versatile little unit. Can be especially useful if you bring a front line of sword masters, say 3 or 4 units. That's obviously very expensive. You can cut down on your costs a little bit if you combine your spearmen and your archers into one unit, right? So Lothan's Sea Guard offer you plenty of options on how to use them in various different builds that you may try to concoct. So be sure to try and use all these units to their strength, as I say, because you can probably only bring a few of them in most cases, maybe more in the campaign of course, but if you waste them, you're going to find that your army may not have a lot of killing power left, and thus that will be the end of you. These 3 units can also be magnets for missiles, artillery and magic, because everyone knows they're so damn powerful, they need to get rid of them. So do your best to protect them, and they will destroy your enemies. Magic is of course another very important part of the High Elves game plan, and certain magic combos can be very effective for them. Most notably, healing magic with your elite units. Because of martial prowess and martial mastery, which require 50% health to be activated, healing magic is very useful. Dragon Princes, Sword Masters, Phoenix Guard, these units are some of the best candidates for your healing spells because you'll get the most out of them if you keep them alive longer. A couple of other nice combos could be the Tempest spell to slow an enemy flying unit down and then blast it with your missiles, or use the Net of Ammontok for the same purpose, or use the Net of Ammontok with the Dragon Breath. Like any faction though, plenty of options on how you use your magic, but I think healing is really one of the most beneficial for the High Elves. Now, what about potential problems for the High Elves? Well, high melee attack damage dealing units can be a problem for a spearman front line if you chose to bring one, as it does rely on the high melee defense of the spearman to stick around. High melee attack damage dealing units will typically trump that high melee defense, and thus will be able to cut through your spearmen pretty quickly, like these Savage Orc Biggins. So be sure to check the front line that your spearmen are about to face. If it looks like they're going to face some melee attack units that may chop through their faces, you may want to try and support them with your cavalry, with dragons, with your lord, with magic, with archers. Any way you can help your front line survive that onslaught of high melee attack, or just bring a more damage dealing front line yourself in the first place. Another big potential problem for High Elves is factions with a lot of armour. This is because the High Elf army doesn't have a great amount of armour piercing units, and the ones that it does have are very expensive. White Lions are going to be the cheapest infantry you can get. There's no armour piercing cavalry, there's no armour piercing missiles, then it's up to the dragons and the phoenixes. So if you're facing a faction that generally has a lot of armour anyway, the chaos, the dwarves, the lizard men, you're going to need to think about this and who's going to do the armour piercing damage for you. This is where I think White Lions come into play a bit more and can make a better front line, although of course that melee defense is a worry when their health starts to drop. Or perhaps you could try a mixture of Spearmen and White Lions if you want to protect them a little bit and save some money. So definitely think about armor piercing when it comes to recruiting your units, because a front line of Spearmen ain't gonna do scheisse against an army of dwarfs. Also don't forget there's a couple of spells which can be good against armor, and of course the Dragon Breath attacks. So there are some of the main tactical ideas when playing as the High Elf army or playing against the High Elf army, but these are of course not concrete rules, these are just some guidelines on how the army is built. You can play them in many different ways. And to that end, let's dive into the build section. I'm going to drop a relatively normal build, a more quirky build, and of course a build from Ninja Hunt, which will be a bit more tried and tested in the online competitive world. If you want to get into online play or a higher level of online play, I suggest you check out his stream if you're into that sort of thing. Now my first build is one designed with armor piercing in mind. It's quite a small army overall, so do be careful when facing larger forces. But infantry heavy armies are in trouble with this build. 4 units of Sword Masters are going to bring the utter pain to everything. I've got 2 units of Lothan's Sea Guard, they're going to be mainly for the anti-large with their missiles and their spears. And then I've got a Lore Master of Hoeth, whose main one job is to heal the Sword Masters. My Lord is a Prince on a Sun Dragon to keep it nice and aggressive, and on one flank I've got Dragon Princes, and on the other an Ithalmar Chariot. So that's the army. First thing to think about is trying to protect your units, because everything is important in this army. My Dragon Princes here nearly going to get charged by these Chaos Knights with lances. Definitely don't want that to happen. Used my Dragon to draw their attention and then got a charge in on them. If there are enemy missile units, you may need to be more aggressive than I am in this one, Going to get my chariot moving down the left, getting ready to harass. So just been sorting out the flanks, making sure my swordmasters aren't going to get done in the back. Here comes Kolek, he's always a problem. Going to get my Lothan Seaguard blasting him down. I'd rather they shoot him down than try and melee him down, because he will probably mess them up. So the more missiles we can put into him, the better. Going to start the ball rolling with the swordmasters, get them into some of the infantry, get the chariot mashing things up. Of course, make sure you get your charges in with the swordmasters. And on the right side, now that we've taken care of the Chaos Knights, the Dragon and the Dragon Princes are free to go to work. Got to dodge those halberds, of course. But yeah, overall, we're trying to protect the swordmasters most of all, keeping them in the fight, keeping them healed, protecting them from being rear charged and things like that. And of course, we're always looking for a good opportunity to drop a breath attack on some clumped up units. Got some routing going on there, just some halberds left. They shouldn't be a problem for 2 units of swordmasters. Going to look for a good target for my dragon to dive into. Don't forget you've got that terror ability on dragons, which is going to be great for routing units temporarily, allowing the swordmasters some extra damage, chopping the enemy's backs off, basically. Going to terrify a couple of units here. That's going to help those swordmasters in the middle. On the left, my swordmasters are holding strong, and guess who's coming to help them out? Well, it's only the bloody dragon princes. There's some chosen over here, so they're probably going to need the help. A nice rear charge from the dragon princes. It's going to put some wavering in motion, and it's looking good for the swordmasters of death. So really it's just letting the swordmasters do most of the work, just trying to stop them getting rear charged, trying to heal them up. And the last problem for us here is the big man. He's been getting gunned down pretty well by the Lothan Seaguard, playing their anti-large role very well. The Lawmaster of Hoeth has been trying to tickle Kolek as well. The Ithilmar boys have just been charging around all over the place in a typical chariot fashion. So yeah, overall you're just letting the swordmasters do the work, trying to support them with the dragon princes and the chariot, the dragon. Keep those swordmasters safe and they will do the work for you. They've got tons of kills, 130 kills for this one, 149 for this one. And this is a lot of Chaos Warriors they're chewing through, some Chaos Marauders as well. 136 for this one, 149 for this one. So hundreds of kills for the Swordmasters, and they're doing all that work themselves, mostly. The healing is of course a big part of that, keeping them in the game, protecting them from that cavalry early on, stopping them getting flanked. So if you can keep the Swordmasters in the fight, they will serve you damn well. This is a great build against the Chaos, against the Lizardmen, Dark Elves, maybe even against the Dwarves, although they have a lot of ranged power, so that could make life difficult for this army. But yeah, Swordmaster Death build, always nice. Now for Ninja Hun's build, which is a pretty balanced, mostly defensive army overall, although it could go on the offense if it wanted to. Up front he's got a mix of anti-large and melee troops, making it quite versatile and able to do damage as well as hold the line. Protecting the back of that front line and dishing out some range damage is 3 units of Lothan Seaguard, and on each flank a unit of Dragon Princes with a Mage of Life, as Ninja likes to keep his Dragon Princes always healed up. So as always we're looking to protect those expensive units, don't want them to get wasted needlessly. So as 2 throwing axes try to get after the Dragon Princes, Ninja's going to pull them away and just gun those down with his Lothan Seaguard instead. Looking to try and mainly use them as an anti-large unit, whether it's with missiles or spears. As for the dragon, he's attacking on the front line, just trying to slow it down a little bit, buy himself a bit of time, stagger that front line, get some missiles on them as quickly as possible, as that is a front line of Bestigor herd, obviously very dangerous armor piercing units. On the left some warhounds are coming around. Luckily dragon princes eat warhounds for breakfast, so that shouldn't be a problem. He's got the mage there to heal as well if need be. Sneaking through the tiniest cheeky hole though is a unit of Centaurs there. They're going to try and get after the Dragon Princes. Front lines are engaging now. Phoenix Guard there. They should hold no problem. White Lions, they can get into the Bestigor. And he sent his Dragon Princes over to help out with those Centaurs with great weapons, because they can be pretty dangerous. Very dangerous armor piercing power. A couple of Centaurs coming around on the right. And you'll notice the Dragon moving into position, trying to get that good angle on these couple of units to try and span the most of them. And these 2 units of Bestigor are going to get hammered by a breath attack. And then the Dragon's going to fly down and assist. So he's helping out the front line, making sure they don't get overrun by that armor piercing Bestigor power. Some Centaurs sneaking around the back though, but they really don't have anywhere to go. They're just going to run into 3 units of spearmen essentially, which is going to spell the end of them of course, because they have no armor. And if that wasn't a bad enough matchup for them, they've got Dragon Princes now charging after them, so they're really properly actually definitely certainly screwed. So it's just a case of having your front line try and hold as much as possible, get the dragon to support them. The Dragon Princes are going to secure the flanks while the Lothan Seaguard try to deal with any of the large units. You've got the Terror of the Dragons to try and help out as well, that healing magic to keep those Dragon Princes healed up at all times, because once they've dealt with the flanking units, they'll be free to go and wreak havoc on every other part of the enemy army. So a nice balanced build from Ninja, quite a good one for new players if you're struggling to micro the high elves, because they can sometimes be a lot. This one doesn't have too much to micro, just the dragon and the cavalry really. So you can definitely make good use of the high elf strengths with this build. Now for the Quirk build, which could work really well or go disastrously wrong. The idea is all built around the ranged units, so I've got 4 units of spearmen up front, which I've upgraded to 3 silver chevrons to give them that extra melee defense and leadership, because we need them to hold as long as possible because they are protecting a lot of archers. I've got 3 units of Lothan Sea Guard, 1 in the middle, 1 protecting the flank and 1 on the other flank. And then I've got 3 units of normal light archers in the middle and an Eagle Claw bolt thrower as well. So a whole ton of ranged units to just gun down the enemy's most important units before they reach us to make life easier for the spearmen. I've also got a Phoenix to help support that front line too with its defensive traits, and a Dragon to either be offensive or defensive. And the trick up the sleeve of this build is a light wizard with a few spells, but most importantly, Net of Amantok. We're going to look to pin down units with the net and then blast them with all our missiles, the most important units. And we have 1 more unit to help deal with stuff like this, damn artillery. I've got 1 unit of hidden Illyrian Reavers who are there to get after any artillery that may be left behind undefended. Goodbye, lightning cannon. First of all, I can use my Phoenix and my Dragon to try and slow some of the better units down so that they potentially take more fire from artillery or missiles. And then it's a case of looking for the most dangerous targets on the battlefield and gunning them down. In this case, Plague Monks and Rat Ogres, maybe some Storm Vermin, are going to be the biggest troubles that I'll have to deal with. So I'm going to try to focus fire down some of those most dangerous units so that when they reach the Spearmen they'll be half dead or maybe nearly all dead, and then it shouldn't be a problem for the Spearmen to finish them off. Like these Rat Ogres coming in here, they're down to half health, they're about to run into Spearmen, and they really have no choice. They got to run into Spearmen, which is a bad matchup for them, or they could try to run around the Spearmen and flank them, but then they'll just get blasted by missiles. So I've just dropped my Net of Amantok. I was waiting for enough magic to use the upgraded version because it will pin them for longer and more units. And then it's just a case of absolutely blasting that bunch of netted units. I'm going to drop a Dragon Breath here. It was on a moving unit, which is obviously a bad call, and you can see why. I was expecting the unit to get netted because it had nets over them, but they didn't seem to get stopped at all. But oh well. We've got a bunch of fire into all the other units. The frontline units have arrived, but they simply don't have enough. These Plague Monks are gone. They had half their health by the time they got to us. Rat Ogres are gone. There are enemy lords in here now, and some Plague Monks are coming in, but again, they're quite badly damaged, so that should help our Spearmen survive. A large lord doesn't have much chance because he's fighting Spearmen, and he's going to get shot down in a minute. As for my Dragon and my Phoenix, they've both been on the offense. Obviously, the low leadership Skaven can be quite easily terrified by those 2 units. Illyrian Reavers getting after some of the better ranged units. So yeah, with this build, you're just looking to try and do as much damage to the enemy before they even reach your front line by trying to slow them down with the Dragon so they take more missile fire, and the Phoenix, the Net of Amantok of course. And what you can attempt to do, which is what I tried to do here, is to flank around with the Lothan Sea Guard so I could shoot the front line in the back. But they got engaged by Plague Monks and Rat Ogres. Going to send over a unit of spare Spearmen to go and help those out. And then I'm going to get the flank on with some normal archers. And as I've got so many archers, I can kind of be a little bit risky with some. So I'm going to flank around with these normal archers and try to shoot some units in the back. And who is there as their target? The perfect target, Plague Monks. So going to start to gun them down in the back. I've got a bunch of units nearby if they really do need some protection, but once we fight off those Rat Ogres and Plague Monks, there really shouldn't be a lot left. So overall, this Skaven army is getting pretty crushed, as the most important damage dealing units that would have got through the front line, the Plague Monks, didn't really have a chance because they got so badly gunned down before they even reached us. I was also using my more mobile units to get after their more elite ranged units, the Death Globe Globadiers, of course a very dangerous unit, got to keep them from my Spearmen, which we did with the Illyrian Reavers and the Dragon. So overall, if you can keep everything just staggered and stop it from reaching your front line for as long as possible, the power of the missile should hold true and you'll be able to fell your foes with this quirky build. So there it is, the High Elf army in all its glory. A very powerful faction, probably the most powerful faction in the game at the moment. If you're new to Total War Warhammer, they're a great faction to learn with because they are so well rounded, and it's easier to understand what's going on when you're trying to learn the game. Anyway, I thank you for watching, I hope you've enjoyed this. I'll see you in the future.